Are according to the latest U.S. Census report, and this came out in July of 2004. Basically, what we're saying here is that multicultural consumers are a major force in the United States consumer market. And yet, you know, a lot of public relations practitioners really aren't sure how to reach them and so forth. Another bit of information for you. We talked now overall on that first slide about 95 million residents being Black, Hispanic, and Asian. Here's the figure for Hispanics alone. And again, this growth rate that you see there was between July 2003 and July 2004. And again, this is from the U.S. Census Bureau. So that's for Hispanics alone. Now, this is where someone asked earlier about the figures for African American. Look at that. They're not too far behind. But there are the numbers, okay? So those two are, you know, apart by what, 2 million people. But basically that. So you have Hispanics, then you have the African Americans. Now the third is the Asian. And look at those numbers. Again, very, very large. Keep something in mind. These rates of growth are what the demographics experts are keeping track of, because their rates of growth are much higher than the non-Hispanic white population. Keep in mind what I said before about that pie, the picture, the pie chart of sorts. Look at the rate of growth there. And the people who do the projections on population start to think, okay, wow, this is really something. What it's going to mean is that in the future, in your lifetime in public relations, there's going to be an increasing need to reach the first three groups there, and less so, not that it's going to ever be unimportant, but the rate of growth for non-Hispanic whites is not growing that fast. So that's why I thought it was important to talk about this. Now, what I will do, by the way, these slides will be up on Angel, so you'll be able to go into the PowerPoint part of my Angel website and find it. So that's really interesting, I thought. In terms of buying power, now in this particular slide, we added Native Americans in here, and I don't have the figure on how many Native Americans we have, but in this particular statistic, they were added in there. And if you look at their economic buying power and how much it has grown since 1990, over 200% since 1990. And by, let's see, back it up, I'm sorry. In fact, to talk about this a little more, by 2009, Hispanics alone are going to account for $923 billion in spending power. I don't have that up on the screen, but just a little statistic for you to indicate how important it is that you understand something about these groups, if you're in it yourself, again, and how to reach these people, because it's really important. The information on this slide came from the Selig Center for Economic Growth. That's S-E-L-I-G, in case you're interested in that. The Selig Center for Economic Growth. And it has a report that talks about the multicultural economy, 2004. So I guess the reason I'm putting all this up on the screen is to help you to understand that there's a need to find ways to reach these groups and to communicate well with them. And the groups that we're going to talk about here that referencing there on the screen would be the African Americans, the Hispanics, and the Asians in particular. And from the public relations experts that I was reading over winter break, one thing that they all talked about was the fact that these three groups have some common cultural characteristics. And as you can see there on the screen, that's what they are. I'll go through them one at a time. The first is the fact that all three of these have a deep family network, the importance of family with a strong father figure or a mother figure. So it's, again, if you're doing public relations work with these groups, it's something to think about. Another thing is that they share an interest in certain kinds of music, certain kinds of food, certain religion, and bonds between friends and families. The interesting thing is, and again, the demographics experts are saying that you cannot assume that the second generation or the third generation of these groups will necessarily assimilate into mainstream culture. You've probably all heard somewhere in high school about the Great American Melting Pot and how immigrant groups come to America and bingo, by the second generation, they assimilate. I'll tell you, it's not so. I have done research with Polish Americans here in Western New York and elsewhere, and I've actually written a book about it. And what I found was even as late as the third generation or fourth generation with Polish Americans, I'm still finding some of those same strong bonds in the Polish group. Now, I'm not talking about Polish here per se, but if you look, for example, at the foods or the religion, in some cases the music in the Polish American population, as far as the fourth generation in this country, there's still that bonding in the group. So it's not necessarily so that the melting pot just somehow assimilates all of us into one big group. It's not. So what you need to do is to highlight these cultural characteristics when you are communicating with them. Research has shown that multicultural consumers tend to be more loyal to specific brands that attempt to reach them in a relevant way that reaches their culture. So the top consumer brands such as Coke and Pepsi and McDonald's have strong community relations programs to reach these particular groups that we've been talking about here. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing is the issue of what language you should use to talk to these groups. Should you be using English as the language, or should you be speaking in the group's native tongue? For example, with the Hispanics, you'd be speaking in Spanish. With the Asian groups, there are a number of different languages there. It can be very expensive to conduct a PR campaign in that native tongue. But research has shown that for the Hispanic community, for example, if you have a mixture of Spanish and English, that can be very helpful. Up there on the screen, you'll see that there's a study by the Roslow Research Group, which found that messages in Spanish were 61% more effective at increasing awareness than the messages that were in English. So that's really something, quite an interesting statistics. If you look at the Yankelovich survey at the bottom of the screen, 69% of Hispanics get more information on products if they're in the Spanish language. So these findings indicate that communicating in the language of that community you're trying to reach will increase the effectiveness and understanding of the product or service that you're trying to communicate about. And those campaigns don't have to be very expensive. And before I talk about this screen, there's one more point about the previous one. You can work with grassroots groups in the community. You can develop in-store promotions. You can even develop websites in the native language. And in fact, a lot of the major companies do have websites that reach the Spanish community, that may reach a number of the Asian communities, especially on the West Coast. So you'll find that this is becoming something that's very popular. The third thing is to establish a personal connection with the minority community. And to personalize the campaign, to use a celebrity from that group, or perhaps an in-house spokesperson. It does help. One example that I found was a woman who works for Hewlett-Packard. She is the director of Hispanic and women-owned businesses for HP America, and she's Hispanic. And she was chosen as Hewlett-Packard's Hispanic spokesperson to help the company better reach the Hispanic market in North America. And so the company launched a Spanish language website with this woman as the spokesperson. She was able to speak very eloquently in the Spanish language to talk about the needs of Hispanic business owners. And as a result,